This happened to me last year. I haven't talked about it much, mainly because no one would believe me, and partly because I still don't know if I made it out with all of me. Not really. I can still smile. I can still breathe. But when I look in the mirror, there's something off. Like my reflection's just a half second too slow. It all started with an email. I hadn't signed up for anything. I hadn't entered any contests or subscribed to any food newsletters, and yet there it was, sitting in my inbox with no sender name, no traceable address. Congratulations, Natalie. You've been chosen to attend a private dining experience at Maison de Verre. Your seat awaits. No RSVP necessary. This invitation is non-transferable. Just that. Simple. Ominous. The email wasn't flashy. No images, no long copy. Just that one paragraph and a minimalist logo. A shimmering black fork and knife crossed over an unblinking eye. I almost deleted it. But I didn't. That's the thing. I kept going back to it. I'm a foodie. Always have been. My Instagram's basically a catalog of niche ramen joints and late-night yakitori spots. I've done pop-up dinners in decommissioned train cars, gone to sake tastings under bridges, even once followed a GPS link to an underground sushi speakeasy hidden behind a laundromat. So as insane as it sounds, this didn't feel impossible. The email had no address, just a set of coordinates. I hesitated, then plugged them into Google Maps. They pointed to a dead-end alley behind an old textile factory, a part of the city I hadn't visited since college. I told myself it was probably some edgy, immersive art dining crossover, some viral campaign I'd accidentally gotten swept into. So I went, curious, stupid, hungry. The alley was silent. No foot traffic. No neon. Just cracked pavement, overflowing trash bins, and graffiti that looked more like sigils than street tags. The kind of place you only walk down with pepper spray in one hand and your phone's flashlight in the other. Except I felt drawn. Like the air itself was leading me. At the very end of the alley, there was a single wooden door, dark, unmarked, lit by a golden pendant lamp that buzzed like it was struggling to stay on. There were no signs, no intercoms, no sound. I knocked. The door creaked open slowly. No one on the other side. Just a long, narrow vestibule. Pristine white marble floors. Walls that looked like bone. The air smelled sweet. Vanilla, old wood, something else I couldn't place. Like the burnt edges of a memory. Directly ahead, hanging from the ceiling, was a floor-to-ceiling curtain of deep red velvet. A single counter stood beside it, almost like a hotel reception desk, with one thing resting on it. A handwritten card, inked in precise calligraphy. Welcome to Maison de Verre. Please read the following carefully before entry. Below it was a small black card, thick and smooth like lacquered obsidian. There were 8 rules, each written in clean gold lettering. Do not reveal the location to anyone. Do not use your phone. You will be asked to leave it in the foyer. Do not speak to the servers unless spoken to. If you hear bells, stop eating and remain still. Do not ask for substitutions. Never touch the host. If a course bleeds, do not let it touch your skin. Finish every course, even if it hurts. I remember just standing there for a long time, reading the card over and over. Something about the wording. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't trying to sell you on an experience. It was cold, like a warning carved into stone. I should have left. Every instinct in my body told me to. But something else overpowered it. Curiosity, maybe. Or hunger of another kind. The walls felt like they were pulsing, breathing with me. I felt warm, Flushed. My skin buzzed with static. Without thinking, I reached into the velvet-lined drawer beneath the counter, placed my phone inside, and slid it shut. It clicked locked behind me. I turned toward the curtain and stepped through. As soon as I stepped through the velvet curtain, the air changed. The scent hit me first, thick and warm, not like the sweet wood and vanilla from the lobby. This was different, deeper, animalic. A cocktail of aged wine, seared meat, dried flowers, and something coppery beneath it all. The dining room was bathed in soft amber light, flickering as if everything were lit by candle or fire, though I couldn't see the source. The walls were wrapped in damask fabric, the color of dried blood, the patterns curling like veins. Above, the ceiling arched high into a dome, painted pitch black, with tiny pinpricks of light like a false night sky. There were no windows, no clocks, just the table. It stretched far longer than the room should have allowed, made of dark mahogany so polished it mirrored the ceiling stars. There were 9 high-back chairs, already filled. I was the last to arrive. None of the other guests looked up as I took my seat. They sat perfectly straight, hands folded neatly in their laps, faces unreadable. Men and women of all ages. Dressed well, but not extravagantly. It was like they'd been chosen for how easily they could disappear in a crowd. No one spoke, no one smiled. I tried to say hello to the woman next to me, a quiet older lady in a navy turtleneck, but she turned her head slightly and stared ahead, unmoving. Then I saw the servers. They came gliding from the shadows, dressed in black, completely. Long sleeves, gloves, faces hidden behind fabric masks stitched tight over their features. They didn't walk so much as drift, their footsteps totally silent, even on the wooden floor. One stopped behind me. I felt their presence like a cold draft across my neck. Then delicately, a napkin was placed in my lap. A wine glass filled itself. The first course arrived. No one explained anything. There was no menu, no greeting, no introduction. Just the beginning. I looked down. On the plate was a square of translucent meat, pale pink, glossy, slightly quivering. It was topped with something black and oily, garnished with tiny blood-red petals. The smell was faintly metallic. The texture was wrong. It twitched when my fork touched it. I looked around. Everyone was eating. Perfectly synchronized. No talking, no chewing sounds, just that eerie, unified rhythm of knives scraping china and glasses clinking. I picked up my fork and took a bite. The meat melted on my tongue like butter, but cold, almost gelatinous. It didn't taste like beef, or pork, or fish. It tasted and wet, not rotten, not fresh, just alive. There was something sharp underneath the texture, like biting down on a raw nerve. The moment it slid down my throat, my jaw locked up for half a second. A spasm. I covered my mouth and tried to breathe through it. Across the table, a man in a gray suit blinked, once, slowly, and chewed with robotic patience. A server appeared behind me and cleared the plate before I could think. My wine glass refilled without a sound. A new fork, slightly longer and thinner, replaced the old one. The second course was already waiting. A pale congealed broth, served in a shallow glass bowl with gold leaf edges. Floating in the center was a small curled object, delicate, gray-pink. It looked like the curled body of an underdeveloped shrimp, but it had a ridge of faint vertebrae, almost fetal. A single flower petal had been placed beside it, as if to distract you. I stirred it once with the tip of my spoon, and the broth changed color, darkened slowly, like ink in water. I was struck by a sudden strong smell, chlorine and rust, I glanced around. Everyone was still eating. No visible reactions. No emotion. They could have been statues. I forced the broth down. It slid in cool, then burned my throat seconds later. My tongue went numb for almost a minute. No one explained anything. No waiter came to ask how it was. The servers floated like ghosts behind each guest. Hands folded behind their backs. Heads always tilted downward, as if in prayer. By the third course, the room itself felt smaller. The walls weren't any closer, but the shadows were. The fabric had started to ripple. Not visibly, but I could feel it. Like the room was breathing, slow and deliberate, between the flickers of candlelight. My plate was cleared before I could even finish swallowing. The third dish arrived beneath a silver cloche. When the server removed it, I instinctively flinched. The smell was overwhelming. It was raw, something that had never seen a flame, something that had never stopped pulsing. A slab of reddish-black meat lay on the plate, marbled with veins and dotted with white seeds. At first I thought it was tongue, then heart. But it was too long, too thin. Something about the curve of it reminded me of a forearm. It was twitching, not from heat, not from nerves. It pulsed, like it had its own heartbeat. I didn't touch it at first, and that's when I noticed everyone else had paused. Each guest sat perfectly still, fork hovering just above the plate, waiting. A man across from me made eye contact. His left eye twitched, just once, and he dipped his fork down slowly, piercing the meat like he was performing surgery. That's when I remembered rule number 8. Finish every course, even if it hurts. I slice into mine. It bled, not a drizzle, not a drip. A pulse of warm, thick blood spilled out from the center, dark as ink, steaming faintly. It slid across the plate like it was trying to get away. I dropped my knife. Some of the blood had splattered across the rim and onto my thumb. I hissed. It stung like boiling water. My skin immediately blistered, raising a perfect puckered welt where the blood had touched me. My vision swam for a second. Everything in the room seemed to tilt. I looked down at my plate, and the meat was gone, replaced. Now it looked like a perfect cut of steak. No blood, no veins, no twitching. I blinked. Had it changed, or had I? The server behind me leaned forward, whispering so softly, I felt the words more than heard them. Do not let it touch your skin. It was the first time any of them had spoken. I gritted my teeth, picked up my fork, and swallowed the next bite whole. The fourth course arrived with a different kind of silence, heavier. Even the candlelight seemed to dim slightly, as if the room itself knew what was coming. The servers appeared in unison. 9 of them, one for each guest. They carried tall, dome-shaped silver cloches, gliding without sound, like oil over marble. Each server stood behind their guest, arms extended, unmoving, until an invisible cue prompted them to lift the domes at the exact same time. I didn't want to look, but I did. Beneath the cloche was a jar, crystalline and cold, its surface slick with condensation. Inside, suspended in a clear, trembling gelatin, was what I thought was an eyeball. Not round, like a normal eye. No, this was elongated, almond-shaped. Human, but wrong. It floated, unblinking, with pale blue irises so light they almost looked silver. Tiny capillaries curled like roots through the sclera, and where the optic nerve should have been, a black thread extended upward, disappearing into the gel like a tether. I reached out, and the glass was warm. Not room temperature, body warm. When I lifted the lid, the scent hit me. Formaldehyde, sour milk, decay. I gagged. The gelatin trembled, and so did I. Across the table, other guests had already begun, their knives slicing through the jelly, careful not to sever the nerve thread. I watched the woman to my left, a red-haired woman in a satin blouse, raise the entire contents of her jar with both hands, tilting her head back like she was drinking nectar. She swallowed it whole. Her eyes rolled back. She smiled. It was the first expression I'd seen all night. The servers said nothing. They only watched, heads bowed, fingers twitching slightly behind their backs, as if trying not to reach forward. I looked back at my jar. The eye was staring at me now. Not figuratively. Its pupil contracted. I dropped the lid, and it shattered on the marble floor. No one reacted. I was still expected to eat. I tried cutting through the gelatin, but it pulsed around the blade, resisting with a jellyfish's flex. When I finally tore it, the eye spasmed, curling like a fist. A hiss escaped the jar, a whistle of escaping gas that smelled like rotting teeth. That's when I saw it. Inside the eye, just for a second, a tiny reflection. Not mine. A room. A red one. A table. A version of me strapped to it. I blinked and it was gone. I reached in with shaking hands, scooping the jelly and the eye into my mouth. It was like chewing mussel soaked in syrup. Grainy. Tough. It popped in places it shouldn't have. The taste was worse, like bitter cream and copper. Like eating a heartbeat. The gelatin coated my throat. It fought the swallow. My eyes burned. My ears rang. And somewhere, deep inside my skull, I felt pressure. A scraping against my thoughts, like something was trying to look back through me. I don't remember finishing it. But when I looked down again, the jar was empty. And so was I. By the time the fifth course arrived, I'd stopped trying to rationalize anything. The diners around me looked hollow. Not hungry, just obedient. Their mouths opened and closed mechanically, swallowing whatever was placed before them like it was obligation, not sustenance. I wiped sweat from my forehead. The napkin came away dark. Red. Was I bleeding? I didn't know. The servers reappeared. 9 again, perfectly timed. But this time, there were no cloches. No plates. Instead, each of us received a mirror. Rectangular, framed in tarnished brass. Its surface was cracked in the center, as if something had tried to escape it from the inside. Mine reflected nothing. I could see the table, the wine, the candlelight. But not myself. That absence alone nearly made me vomit. Then I saw what had been laid on top of the mirror. A long, coiled object, glistening wetly. At first I thought it was a string of sausage casing. But as it uncurled ever so slightly, I realized it was braided tongues. 3, intertwined, glossy, pink-brown. The tips had been pierced through with delicate gold rings. The braid moved gently. Not from breeze, not from heat. It was breathing. The woman across from me, tall, gaunt, with a bleeding scrape on her cheek, smiled at hers. She ran a finger along the braid like it was silk ribbon. Then she picked it up with both hands, tilted her head back, and began slurping it in. Her eyes watered, but she didn't stop. Her jaw unhinged. The crunch echoed. I turned back to my mirror. The tongues were curling toward me. I reached for my fork, but it was gone. Only a pair of slender, sharp scissors lay beside the mirror now. The message was clear. I picked them up, hesitating only a moment before snipping into the braid. It screamed, not out loud, but I felt it, inside my teeth, like a nerve being severed in a dream. A flash of memories filled my head. People I didn't know, begging, crying, clutching their throats. I saw tongues being pulled from mouths, still connected to vocal cords, dropped into piles like butcher's waste. The braid twitched and bled something black that steamed on the glass. I tried to stop, but my body kept going, compelled. I took one of the tongues, still warm, and placed it in my mouth. The texture was wrong, furry, like it had started to mold. The taste was a sour blend of milk, salt, and burnt paper. Each bite released a pocket of air that smelled like spoiled meat and breath from a long-sealed coffin. The moment I swallowed, I felt someone's scream echo inside my skull. I wasn't just eating a tongue. I was consuming a voice. It clawed at the inside of my chest, whispering nonsense in a language I didn't understand. I grabbed my wine glass and drank until I couldn't taste anything anymore. When I looked up, the woman across from me was now staring at me directly. Her mouth was gone, just skin, smooth, as if it had never existed. She didn't blink. By the time the sixth course arrived, I was losing track of time. The candlelight had dimmed into a near blood hue. Shadows along the wall no longer matched the guests. Some moved when no one else did, sliding and stretching like they had their own agenda. The air smelled heavier, thicker, like something had been rotting behind the wallpaper for weeks, and no one had cleaned it up. When the servers returned, they were no longer gliding. They shuffled. One of them dragged something behind his heels. Something I couldn't see, but I could hear it squelch softly against the lacquered floor. Each of us was handed a wooden box, long and shallow, made from dark, stained pine. A simple red string held the lid in place, tied, but with reverence, like a gift from a friend you couldn't trust. The man to my right untied his string with trembling hands. I followed. The lid came off with a quiet groan, revealing a base layer of soft, clumpy rice. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but there was a sheen to it. Wet, too wet, like it had been soaked in tears or something thicker. Bits of it were tinged pink, like it had absorbed meat juice. Nestled into the center of the rice were two miniature hands. Not doll hands, not candy. They were fleshy, human, delicate, with tiny fingernails and creases in the knuckles. They were curled into loose fists, bound at the wrists with red silk thread, as though they'd once belonged to a child who had done something very, very wrong. I stared. I waited for the horror to be shared, for someone to gasp or question what the hell this was. But everyone else was already eating. One guest popped a pink-stained clump of rice into their mouth with serene precision. Another untied the thread from one of the tiny wrists and sliced delicately into the palm with a gold-handled scalpel. I sat frozen. My scalp itched. My jaw ached. I didn't know if I was breathing. A faint smell drifted up from the box, breast milk, salt, and decay. Sweet and putrid all at once, like death, cradled. The hands moved, only slightly, but enough. The left one unfurled a finger, pointing upward. Its nail had initials carved into it. Mine. I dropped the chopsticks. The servers turned toward me in unison. Heads bowed, waiting, watching. I couldn't feel my legs. My heartbeat wasn't in my chest anymore. It was behind my eyes, pounding like someone trying to claw their way out. I picked up the chopsticks again, scooped a mound of the hot, damp rice into my mouth. It tasted like forgotten memories, bits of laughter, sobbing, metal. Every chew brought a new flavor, none of them meant to be tasted. I bit down on something soft, too soft, and it collapsed like jelly in my molars. I couldn't tell if it was tendon or tongue, but I swallowed. The guests continued their ritual, mouths slowly working, shoulders rising and falling with inhuman calm. The woman across from me had unwrapped both hands. Hers were clapping, not loud, not forceful. Just enough. Just enough to sound like applause for something that should never be celebrated. I was losing myself by then. Not in the poetic way people describe heartbreak or grief, but literally. The longer I sat at that table, the less certain I was that I had ever been someone named Natalie, that there was a world outside this room, that I hadn't been born right there in that seat, bred to eat and bleed and obey. The sixth course had left me shaking. The rice sat like a stone in my stomach, and the tiny hands, now gone, had left an afterimage burned behind my eyes. I couldn't stop feeling the weight of them. I swore I could still feel one gripping my finger under the table, but then the servers returned, and something changed. They no longer came silently. Their feet hit the floor now, wet slaps, as though they were barefoot. Their black uniforms hung looser, soaked through at the hems, leaving trails of red water behind them. Each of them held a small opaque bowl covered with a thick, wax-sealed lid. They placed one in front of each guest, along with a long serrated needle where our utensils used to be. My hands refused to move. The bowl trembled slightly, not from my touch, from within. Whatever was inside, it was alive. I looked around the table. The others were already cutting through the wax seal, drawing long crimson trails across the bowl's surface. One by one, lids were removed. The air filled with a smell that can only be described as womb rot, something biological and horrifying. It wasn't meat, it wasn't plant, it was cellular. I peeled away my lid. Inside was a pale pink sack of flesh, like a placenta swollen with fluid. Veins danced under the surface, pulsing faintly. Floated in a cloudy broth that shimmered with oil and something that resembled ground teeth. The sack twitched. I leaned in and heard something. A heartbeat, slow, muffled, coming from inside it. It wasn't just alive, it was aware. The server behind me whispered, voice rasping like dead leaves. "It will know you. You must eat it before it eats you." My stomach lurched. I tasted bile. Across the table, the gaunt man to my left had already sliced his open. A tiny jaw spilled out of his bowl, complete with a gum line full of infant-like teeth. He smiled at it, then shoved the entire thing into his mouth, chewing until blood ran down his chin and into his collar. The sack in my bowl began to swell. The heartbeat quickened. It was growing. I stabbed it with the needle. It didn't burst. It screamed. Not aloud. In my head. The scream was human. Feminine. Mine. I carved through the membrane and pulled out what looked like a replica of my own tongue, attached to a coil of intestine-like tissue that writhed as if in pain. It wasn't cooked. I don't think it was meant to be. I looked to the woman across from me. Her face was slick with desire, but her bowl was empty. She was mouthing something silently. I realized it was my name. I ate every last bite. It tasted like regret, sweet and warm at first, then rapidly decaying into something black and bitter and full of voices. Each chew was an echo of something I'd forgotten, something I wished I still had. The final swallow made my vision pulse. I couldn't tell if I was crying or bleeding, and that's when I heard it. The bells. Soft at first, like wind chimes on a still night, then louder, metallic, shrill, like funeral chimes rung underwater. Every guest froze, forks lowered, hands stilled. No one chewed, no one breathed. I followed their lead. The lights dimmed to nothing, and from behind the walls I heard footsteps that did not belong to the servers. Heavy, measured, getting closer. The bells stopped all at once. The silence that followed was unnatural, total. I couldn't hear my own breathing. My pulse was gone. The air didn't move. The darkness felt thick, like something was pressing against my eyes, wrapping around my face like cloth soaked in warm water. Then I heard the door. Not the curtain I'd entered through. A different door. Somewhere deeper. It opened with a long, aching creak. Not mechanical, organic, like cartilage stretching, or a joint dislocating. Footsteps followed. Not hurried. Not dragging. Deliberate. A rhythm meant to announce power. With every step, I felt pressure build in my ears, behind my eyes, deep in my molars. Something about this thing coming toward us wasn't made for rooms or walls or tables. It wasn't meant to be seen. But we all would see it anyway. The lights returned. Not candlelight, but something older. Pale, flickering, like flame forced through bone. And there he was. The host. Tall, unnaturally so. His head scraped the arch of the black ceiling, even though he didn't appear to stand upright. He was bent, like a marionette whose strings had tangled. He wore no clothes, just a cloak, stitched from fabric that pulsed and crawled. Not cloth, skin. Faces sewn together, mouths agape in frozen screams, stitched side by side down his back. His face was covered by a mask made of mirrored glass. It was cracked in the center, and the longer you looked at it, the more you swore it reflected a version of you that was slightly wrong. His hands were not hands, too many fingers, too many knuckles. He reached the head of the table and extended one long limb toward the center. He didn't speak. He only knelt, as if waiting. The servers emerged again, carrying plates covered in cloth. No domes this time. No silver, no glamour. Each cloth was jet black, wet at the edges. They placed one in front of every guest. Mine twitched. Not metaphorically. Literally. The eighth course was alive. When the servers pulled away the cloths, a collective breath escaped the table, except it wasn't relief. It was resignation. On my plate was a perfectly preserved full-color replica of my own face. Not sculpted, not carved. Real. Pores. Freckles. The faint scar beneath my eyebrow. Even the mole on my jawline I used to hate as a teenager. It stared up at me with my eyes, still wet, still blinking. The lips trembled, mouthing something silently. Let me go. I looked down at my own hands, reached up to touch my face. It was still there, but wrong. Too numb, too light. Like it was only a mask, barely glued in place. The other guests had already begun to eat. One woman sliced open the cheek of her own reflection, carefully plating the tissue as if she were serving foie gras. The man next to me removed his own eyelid, his real one, dropped it on his plate, and replaced it with the one from the dish. Everyone was trading pieces. Parts of themselves for parts of something better or worse. I tried to stand, but the chair wouldn't move. It had grown roots. Long black tendrils wrapped around my legs, up my thighs, pressing into my flesh. I screamed. No sound came out. The host looked at me for the first time, and the mirrored mask cracked wider. I saw myself in it, but smiling with too many teeth, a smile that didn't stop at the mouth but tore upward into the eyes. The mask began to flake away. Underneath was a face made entirely of others. Noses, eyes, lips, pressed together like wax, writhing slowly, trying to reform, to become me. Because that's what the host was. All the people who hadn't finished their meal, who hadn't obeyed the rules, who had tried to leave before dessert. I looked back down. My face was still blinking, still whispering. I picked up the knife and began to eat. Each bite was cold, software. It tasted like secrets I'd kept from myself, like pain I'd forgotten, It tasted like the smell of my mother's perfume, the breath of my first kiss, the rot of my last lie. It tasted like me. The final swallow made the room disappear, and I woke up in my apartment. Everything was back to normal. My phone was beside me. Clean sheets, no blood, no mass, just the city outside my window. But when I look in the mirror now, it's almost me. Almost. But some nights, the reflection flickers, just for a second, and I see her again. My own face, still sitting at that table, still chewing, still begging to be let go. And I know, I never really left, because Maison de Verre never lets anyone leave. Not completely.